Welcome to another deep dive. We've got some really fascinating stuff to cover today. We're going to be looking at the Science of Identity Foundation,
SF.
for SIF.
Yeah.
You sent over a bunch of articles on this, some personal accounts,
Yeah.
really kind of paint a picture of this group. Its leader, Chris Butler,
Mm-hmm.
and his connection to Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, it's a really interesting intersection of politics and spirituality
Yeah.
and all the complexities of lineage in modern Hinduism.
Yeah. I mean, most people know Tulsi Gabbard from her time in Congress and her presidential run,
Right.
but her upbringing within SIF is something that's not as widely known.
Yeah, and it seems to have really had a lasting impact on her life. Even today, she still has ties with Sif. So I think,
Hmm.
getting into the group's history, the controversies surrounding it is
Yeah.
going to be really important.
Absolutely. So let's start there. From what I've gathered, Chris Butler, who also goes by Jagadguru Siddheswarapananda Paramahamsa,
That's a mouthful.
yeah,
Yeah.
founded SIF based on the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition within Hinduism.
Yes, that's right. And like many new religious movements, Sif's story is very much intertwined with the story of its leader. And so Chris Butler initially was a follower of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So Prabhupada, as you may or may not know, is the founder of ISKCON,
Well,
which is probably the most well-known Gaudiya Vaishnava group in the West.
yeah,
But
like the Hare Krishnas.
the Hare Krishnas, exactly.
Yeah.
But Butler eventually broke away from ISKCON and
Yeah.
formed his own organization back in the 1970s.
Okay, so we have this lineage connection back to ISKCON
Right.
and the broader Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, which emphasizes devotion to Krishna.
Yes.
But it's Butler's actions later on that seem to be at the heart of a lot of the controversy here, specifically his decision to abandon sannyasa.
Yeah, sannyasa is a crucial concept here. And it's a stage of life in Hinduism where an individual renounces all worldly attachments. So that means material possessions, career ambitions, family ties, all of that gets renounced in favor of a complete dedication to spiritual pursuits.
Wow. So becoming a sannyasi is a pretty serious commitment,
It is.
and it comes with a certain level of respect and authority within the tradition, right?
Absolutely. Sannyasis are often seen as guides, teachers, and even gurus for others who are on their own spiritual journey. And that renunciation that they embody is seen as a sign of their spiritual attainment and a testament to their commitment to the path of liberation.
And Chris Butler was a sannyasi, at least initially.
He was, and this is where the controversy really kicks in. Butler eventually abandoned his sannyasa vows to marry one of his disciples, Wailana, and together they built a substantial business empire. I mean, they're involved in ventures like the down-to-earth health food store chain in Hawaii, amongst other things.
That's quite a departure from the traditional image of a renunciate.
Yeah.
It seems like a pretty stark contrast.
I don't know.
A spiritual leader who's taken vows of poverty and detachment, actively engaging in business and accumulating wealth.
It certainly raises questions.
Yeah.
And it's a point of contention for many people, both within and outside of SIF. Some argue that Butler's actions directly contradict the very essence of sannyasa, that you can't truly be detached from the material world while you're simultaneously building a business empire.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how his followers reconciled those seemingly contradictory actions with their understanding of his spiritual authority.
Right. And that's something that we're going to explore further as we delve into these firsthand accounts and the criticisms from former SIF members.
Yeah, because it's one thing to kind of read about these controversies from a distance.
Yeah.
But it's quite another to hear the experiences of those who were directly involved, who lived within this community, and who grappled with these questions firsthand.
Right. And those personal stories, along with, I think, a deeper look into SIF's practices and some of these accusations of financial irregularities, will give us a much more nuanced understanding of this group and its place within this larger landscape of new religious movements.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. One of the sources you sent mentioned a former SIF devotee,
Yep.
named Mahabhava Das.
Okay.
And he had a really interesting experience. He was deeply involved with SIF in the Philippines. In fact, he was heading up several programs.
Okay, so sounds like a pretty dedicated member.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, it seems that Mahabhava Das started exploring the teachings of another respected Gaudiya Vaishnava guru,
Okay.
Srila Narayan Maharaj, and he found these teachings to be really enriching.
Uh-huh.
But also, he started to feel kind of discouraged, even fearful within SIF about interacting with other gurus.
Oh, so this goes back to the idea of lineage
Yes.
and the potential conflicts that can arise
Exactly.
when devotees start to engage with teachings outside of their specific group.
Precise.
Yeah.
And in this case, it led to a pretty dramatic confrontation.
Okay.
Mahapava Das eventually left SIF,
Huh?
and the reaction from Butler's followers was quite intense.
What do you mean by intense?
Well, according to Mahapava Das, over 30 of his fellow SIF members went to his center.
Wow.
Enraged by his decision to associate with another teacher, they accused him of being disrespectful to their guru, Chris Butler, and they even delivered a letter from Butler himself
Okay.
to Narayan Maharaj.
Why?
And apparently this letter contains several statements that were seen as offensive by many people.
So it sounds like exploring other teachings within the same tradition
Yeah.
was considered almost like a betrayal of sorts.
It does seem that way. And this incident really, I think, gets at those complexities of spiritual authority and the dynamics within these groups.
Yeah.
Is there room for dialogue and exchange between different lineages? Or does loyalty to one guru require a complete separation from others?
Right. It's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder about the level of control exerted by leaders within these new religious movements.
And how those dynamics might play out
Yeah.
for individuals who choose to leave or question certain practices.
Yes, speaking of leaving, we also have those accounts from Ian Koviak and Rama Ranson.
Yes.
And they grew up within SIF, attended SIF-run schools, and were immersed in Butler's teachings from a very young age.
Yeah, they really bought into it.
Yeah.
What's striking about their stories, I think, is the level of devotion that they had initially towards Butler and his wife, Wailana. They were raised to see them as messengers of God,
Wow.
and they truly believed in the path they were on.
But obviously something changed.
They did.
What led them to become critical of SIF?
Well, as they matured, they
Okay.
began to question certain aspects of the organization, including Butler's leadership.
Okay.
They felt that he exerted excessive control over his followers' lives. They felt that the financial practices were questionable, and that some of the teachings themselves were either contradictory or even harmful.
Right, and some of the sources you sent included accounts of Butler's lectures that were described as sexually graphic and homophobic.
Yes, and those accounts are definitely disturbing. And I think, it's important to acknowledge these criticisms and consider the impact they may have had on those exposed to such teachings,
Yeah.
especially at a young age.
Especially at a young age.
Yeah.
So it seems like these two individuals who were once devout followers of Butler
Yeah.
eventually become disillusioned with his leadership, the group's practices, and even some of the core teachings.
And their stories are a powerful reminder that even within these really tightly knit spiritual communities, individuals can evolve in their understanding and find themselves really at odds with the group they once belonged to.
Yeah, and it speaks to the courage it takes to actually speak out against a powerful leader and community,
Yes.
especially when facing potential social and familial repercussions.
Absolutely. Now, going back to Butler's abandonment of sannyasa, I think it's worth exploring this a little further to really grasp the significance of this action.
Okay, yes, let's dive into that a bit more.
Okay.
I think it's a crucial piece of this puzzle. We've talked about sannyasa in general terms, but how does it specifically relate to the controversies surrounding Chris Butler?
So to understand that, we need to remember what sannyasa represents within this tradition.
Okay.
It's not just about giving up possessions, it's about complete detachment from the material world. A single-pointed focus on spiritual liberation.
All right.
A sannyasi is seen as someone who has transcended worldly desires and ambitions, someone whose sole purpose is to serve God and guide others.
So their renunciation isn't just symbolic.
It's not.
It's seen as a reflection of their spiritual attainment
Yes.
and a source of their authority.
Exactly. And that's why Butler's decision to abandon sannyasa to marry and build a business empire caused such a stir. It challenged the traditional understanding of what it means to be a renunciate and raised serious questions about his commitment to the path he was preaching.
It's almost like a monk deciding to leave the monastery,
Yeah.
get married, and start a corporation.
Right.
It doesn't quite align with the image of a renunciate, does it?
It certainly doesn't fit the traditional mold. And that's why this has been a source of ongoing debate within the community. Some view it as blatant hypocrisy,
Right.
arguing that his actions contradict the very essence of sannyasa.
Yeah.
Others defend him, saying that he simply adapted his teachings for modern life
Okay.
and that his business ventures are a way to support his spiritual mission.
So there's no easy answer here.
There isn't.
It really comes down to how you interpret the principles of sannyasa
Right.
and whether you believe Butler's actions align with those principles.
It's a complex issue and speaks to, I think, the broader challenges of reconciling these ancient spiritual traditions with contemporary life.
Yeah.
You know, can a renounced spiritual leader also be a successful entrepreneur? Can they be married and still maintain that level of detachment required for sannyasa?
Yeah. These are questions that don't have simple answers.
They don't. And it also makes you wonder about the impact this had on his followers.
Right.
How did they grapple with this apparent contradiction?
Yeah, it seems there were a variety of responses.
There were.
Some were deeply troubled,
Yeah.
seeing it as a betrayal of their trust and a violation of the spiritual principles they held dear.
Right.
Others rationalized it,
Mm.
finding ways to justify his actions and maintain their faith in his leadership.
Right, and one of the articles even suggested that some of his followers viewed his business ventures as a way to spread his teachings and influence on a larger scale.
Interesting. So for some, the ends justified means.
It seems so.
Even if they found his abandonment of sannyasa to be unorthodox, they might have believed that his ultimate goal was still spiritual advancement
Right.
and that his business success was simply a tool to achieve that.
It reminds us that within any group, there's going to be a spectrum of perspectives and interpretations.
Yeah.
And when it comes to matters of faith and spiritual authority, those interpretations can be deeply personal and even resistant to change,
Yeah.
even when faced with seemingly contradictory evidence.
And it's important to remember the power dynamics at play here.
Oh, absolutely.
When you have a charismatic leader like Butler, who is seen as a guru or a spiritual authority,
Right.
there's a natural tendency for followers to defer to his judgment,
Yes.
even if it challenges their own understanding or intuition.
Yeah, it makes it difficult for people to speak out
Yeah.
or question practices they find troubling.
So it highlights that tension between devotion and critical thinking,
Yes.
between trusting your guru and trusting your own discernment.
Which is a tension anyone engaging with a spiritual path needs to be aware of.
Yeah.
It's not about blindly accepting everything your guru says, nor is it about rejecting their teachings outright. It's about finding that balance, that space where you can both learn from your teacher and critically evaluate the information you're receiving.
It's a lifelong process.
It is.
And one that requires honesty, humility,
Yeah,
and a willingness to engage with difficult questions.
absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Yeah. What should they be thinking about as they reflect on this information?
I think the most important takeaway is the importance of critical thinking,
Mhm.
especially when engaging with spiritual teachings or groups.
Yeah.
We can't just accept claims of authority at face value.
Right.
We need to examine the evidence, consider multiple perspectives, and be willing to ask tough questions,
Yeah.
even when it comes to those we revere as spiritual guides.
It's a reminder that spiritual paths are rarely straightforward.
Yeah.
There will be bumps in the road, doubts, and even disillusionment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
It's all part of the process of
Yeah.
growth and discernment.
And when we encounter these groups or teachings that challenge our understanding,
Yeah.
it's an opportunity to deepen our own reflection, to refine our values, and to clarify what truly resonates with our hearts.
Absolutely.
You know, as we've been discussing Chris Butler and Sif, it's clear that his decision to abandon sannyasa is a major point of contention.
Right.
But I'm wondering if we can take a step back and explore the concept of sannyasa itself a bit more.
Okay.
For those unfamiliar with Hinduism, it might not be clear why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get caught up in the specifics of the controversy without really appreciating the deeper significance of sannyasa within this tradition.
Right, so we've touched on the basic definition, renouncing worldly attachments, dedicating oneself to spiritual pursuits. But what does it really mean to embody sannyasa? What does it look like in practice?
Well, it's a multifaceted concept, but at its core, sannyasa is about cultivating a state of detachment, both internally and externally. It's about minimizing material possessions, simplifying one's lifestyle, and focusing intently on spiritual practices, like meditation, chanting, and studying scriptures.
So that's a pretty radical shift, isn't it?
It is.
To move away from all those things that society typically values.
Mhm.
Career success, material wealth, family ties. and prioritize something that's often seen as intangible and otherworldly.
It is a radical shift, and it's not a path for everyone, but for those who are called to it, sannyasa is seen as a really powerful means of accelerating spiritual growth and attaining liberation
Okay.
from this cycle of birth and death.
So it's not just about giving things up.
No.
It's about a fundamental change in perspective, a reorientation of one's entire being towards the divine.
Exactly. And that's why sannyasas are held in such high regard within the tradition. They are seen as embodying those ideals of renunciation and detachment,
Yeah.
as having transcended the allure of the material world to focus solely on the spiritual.
And their authority, their ability to guide others on the spiritual path is directly linked to that embodiment of sannyasa, right?
Absolutely. Their renunciation is seen as a sign of their spiritual attainment, a testament to their commitment to the path of liberation.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Chris Butler's decision to abandon sannyasa
Yeah.
so jarring for many. It challenges the very foundation of their understanding of his teachable authority.
Because it seems to create a disconnect between what he's preaching, this detachment, renunciation, spiritual focus,
Right.
and how he's living his life.
Exactly.
Building a business empire, accumulating wealth, engaging in marriage. These actions don't really align with the traditional image of a sannyasi.
They don't, and that disconnect is at the heart of this controversy. Some see it as a blatant hypocrisy, while others try to reconcile it by saying he's simply adapting the teachings for modern times.
It's interesting to think about how his followers navigated that tension.
Yeah.
Were there any accounts in the sources we had that shed light on their perspectives?
There were a few. Some expressed, deep concern and
Mhm.
disillusionment, feeling that his actions betrayed the trust they had placed in him as a spiritual leader.
Uh-huh.
Others rationalized it by saying that his business ventures were a way to support his spiritual mission, or that his teachings transcended any external form.
So there wasn't like a unified response,
Right.
which makes sense.
Yeah.
These are complex issues that touch on deeply held beliefs and personal experiences.
Exactly. And it highlights the challenges of navigating spiritual authority in a world where these traditional frameworks are constantly being challenged and reinterpreted.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Sif, Chris Butler, and the complexities of sannyasa,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What do you hope they'll reflect on as they process this information?
I think the most important takeaway is this importance of critical thinking and discernment, especially when engaging with spiritual teachings and groups. It's essential to remember that spiritual authority is not absolute, and it's always wise to approach any teachings or leaders with a healthy dose of skepticism and an open mind.
And to remember that the journey of spiritual growth is often messy and nonlinear.
Right.
There will be doubts and questions,
Absolutely.
and even disillusionment along the way. But those challenges can actually be opportunities for deeper reflection
Yeah.
and a more nuanced understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely. And as we've seen with Sif and Chris Butler, sometimes the most challenging questions are the ones that don't have easy answers.
Yeah.
But wrestling with those complexities can lead to a richer and more authentic engagement with our own spiritual path.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating exploration, and I hope our listeners will continue to kind of delve into these topics and engage with these questions in their own lives. Remember, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding is a lifelong journey, and there's always more to discover.